All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to briefly go over some highlights from the PowerPoints that I assigned for Wednesday and Friday, and then we're going to push forward on to 6.10, and we're going to go over some S rules. So for 6.8, the main thing I hope you get out of 6.8 is, again, there's a couple of translation patterns that are frankly unintuitive, and it's important that you get them down. I think for most people, what you have to do is you just have to photocopy this page, print this page out, put it somewhere to study, and you just have to memorize it cold. Let's go over a few highlights here. There's a bunch of ways to say and that don't sound like and. So transition words like but, yet, however, and although, those are actually all ands and translate as and. Now in English, something like but or however sort of has an extra nuance to it that doesn't get translated. Usually when you use like a but, it's still an and, it's still making two claims, but the but indicates that the second claim somehow conflicts with the first claim. So you might say something like this: the suspect had motive, but he didn't have opportunity. That translates as an and. Now in English, it kind of communicates more than that, that somehow the second half conflicts with what we might think based on the first half. But when we translate, it just translates as and. So all four of these, despite the fact that they don't sound like and, they're ands. And you just need to learn how to translate it mechanically as an and. Unless translates either, we've got two choices here, either as an or the negated first half of a conditional. So, and I'd make sure you know both of those options. All right, now a bunch of things that sound like if that don't get translated as if. Just if, IFF, which is short for if and only if. All three of these translate as triple bar. Do not translate it with an arrow. And all three of those indicate that both halves of the equation are expected to match. Finally, only if, you'll remember we had a bunch of conversations back on chapter 2 with Aristotelian syllogisms about only. Only if always, always, always introduces the second half of an arrow statement. And it's one of those patterns that it shows up on exam 1, it shows up on exam 3, it shows up on exam 4. If you didn't learn it for exam 1, please learn it for exams 3 and 4, because this will show up again and again. And I want you to get the points for this one. So again, when you see only, it indicates that it's not just going to be an if. And only if introduces the second term, no matter where it shows up. All right, finally, 3 patterns that are somewhat technical, that are frankly unusual to hear in normal conversation, but these are common philosophy words. Sufficient, necessary, and sufficient. A is sufficient for B is the most intuitive of the three. And what that means is if A, then B. That's easy. A is necessary for B means something very weird. It's one of the few translation patterns where, despite the fact that there are no negation words, it translates with not just one, but two negations. A is necessary for B means if not A, then not B. And then A is necessary and sufficient for B means A triple bar B. I think of the three, I think the second one, the necessary, is the most difficult of the three to memorize because frankly, it's just weird. Normally, you don't start adding negations if there aren't words like not or don't or can't. Questions? I encourage you to get this down, to memorize it cold, because we're going to give you problems like translate and then test for validity. And if you get the translation wrong, it's probably going to mess up the test for validity. Are there specific problems that we should talk about? Yes, sir.
Number 8.
Number 8. Do you have the English for number 8?
No, I do not.
All right. Can I borrow a book? You, sir. Yes. Let me borrow. Number 8 on 6 points. Number 8. She neither asserted it nor hinted at it. Yeah, this is going to just be a negated or statement. She neither negated or she neither asserted it nor hinted at it. So we only get one negation, it's outside, but as we'll see in 6.10, it implies that both halves are false. Other, yes?
Number 11.
Number 11. I'll go, assuming that you'll go. All right, now assuming introduces the first half of an arrow statement. So, if basically it says, if you go, I go. But what's confusing about it is it gives you the I first. But the assuming is an antecedent indicator. It indicates the left half of an arrow statement. What else? Yes, ma'am. 14. You get mashed potatoes or French fries, but not both. All right. Mashed. You get mashed potatoes or French fries and not mashed potatoes and French fries. Now, what was hard is it just doesn't, explicitly say all this. It just says not both. So you have to figure out how to express not both. And that is the proper way to say not both. So normally, in normal English, you would just say this. Pick one, have either mashed potatoes or French fries. But because the logic or is an inclusive or, which lets you have both, we need this additional phrase to rule out the possibility of you choosing both. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. 15. You're wrong if you say that. All right, so we have the if at the end. The if introduces the left half because it doesn't have an only or a just. So if normally introduces the left half. So if you say that, the T for that, then you're wrong. I saw a couple more hands. Yes, sir?
Yeah, number
10. Only if you exercise are you fully alive. Only if introduces what? The second term. Only if you exercise are you fully alive. If you're fully alive, then you exercise. All right, did we have one more?
I just have a general question.
Sure.
So you say that if the word if is in front of like some sort of premises, that is like introducing it first, or what's with that?
If it's not a just if or an only if it's just an if, it introduces the left half. Again, it can be confusing if they give you the if late in the sentence, but almost always, with the exceptions of the only and the just, typically it introduces the left half of the arrow statement. Okay, good. Let's talk a little bit about idiomatic arguments. Oh, by the way, I want to point something out on here. You see what I just highlighted up there, statistics tracking? In case you don't know what that means, here's what that means. It means I know exactly who downloaded these PowerPoints and exactly when they downloaded them. Which also means I know exactly who, in the 5 days they had to access these, didn't open them even once. So look, I'm not going to shame anybody publicly, but I want you to know if you're in the 30% of the class that didn't bother to download from Scholar even once, despite the fact that you had 5 days, that's not a good thing. This was not, we've got like a week and a half before the exam. We have an exam next Wednesday. We need to push towards that exam. This is not the time to try to coast. This is not a coasting kind of class. The last month gets harder, not easier. So please, 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 do everything you should be doing. And I hope that you can get this stuff down cold. It's like exam one, these last 2 exams. A lot of people think they're okay because they mostly get it and it sounds right when I explain it. And then the exam comes and they get another 40, which is why exam 3 and exam 4 correlates closely with exam 1. So I don't want that to happen to you. So please, please push hard at the end. Don't slack off. Despite the fact that it's beautiful outside and it certainly feels like the kind of weather where it'd be nice to kind of coast towards the end, but it's not the kind of class where we can do that. All right, idiomatic arguments. Now this should have felt familiar because we talked about idiomatic arguments when we talked about Aristotelian syllogisms. And the principles are mostly the same. The principles work something like this. In real life, most people do not present arguments in formal logical patterns. So what you need to do if you want to examine other people's arguments is you need to analyze them by putting them into formal logical patterns. So arguments are often presented in disordered paragraphs with unclear structure. The first thing we need to do is define the premise and the conclusion and to clarify the structure of an argument. So remember what we are trying to do when we're going to test an argument for validity, we want to get the premises first and then the conclusion. And a typical structure is 2 premises and a conclusion, although there's no limit to the number of premises that people can use. And there are super helpful words called premise indicators and conclusion indicators. which tell us how we are supposed to categorize each statement. The premise indicators are things that are familiar, things like because, for, since, after all. I assume that, as we know, for these reasons. These are all premise indicators, which go in the front of your argument. Conclusion indicators include words like hence, thus, so, therefore, it must be, it can't be, this proves, this shows, or if you've got somebody really snooty that wants to communicate that they know Latin, they'll say ergo. These are all conclusion indicators, which means you put that statement last. Step one is when we're trying to put idiomatic arguments, natural English language arguments into logical form. The most helpful thing to do is first find the conclusion. The easiest way to find the conclusion is if the conclusion gave you a nice conclusion indicator. It won't always, but that's the first thing to look for. Location is another hint. Many people are helpful and they just sort of intuitively put the conclusion at the end. Some people introduce their arguments with the conclusion, though. Sometimes they stick them in the middle. That's the hardest kind to find and most annoying kind. If you follow the pattern that you are taught in English 123 and 223, you will put the conclusion at the beginning and at the end of your argument. Another principle is bullet point 3 here. A properly formed argument, and of course there's lots of people in our culture that don't know how to properly form an argument, but a properly formed argument will attempt to establish a more controversial conclusion on the basis of less controversial premises. Again, if you're hoping to be persuasive, usually you try to start with claims that you think your interlocutor will believe. Again, other than the conclusion indicators, these are not airtight principles. I guess another way is I would just say the conclusion is the point that an argument builds to. So if you look at an argument and you say, oh, well, this is the guy's point, this is the person's point, then that's the conclusion. The premises. The premises are claims that are meant to be evidence for the other claims. Again, when a good arguer is making an argument, the premises will be less controversial than the conclusions. And we need to look for unstated implicit premises. Claims that are required to make the argument make sense, claims that fill in a gap without which the argument would just be kind of stupid. So remember, in logic, we always try to understand the best possible interpretation of what somebody else is trying to say. Sadly, this is the opposite of the pattern that the general culture teaches you. So here again, if there's an obvious claim that's missing in someone's arguments, we don't go, stupid argument, like you might do on social media. Instead, we want to look for the unstated implicit premises, and we want to add them. Usually this means the person we're talking to, assumes something and assumes that we would assume something. So, for example, you'll hear lots of people say things like this during an election time. They'll say things like, don't vote for him, don't vote for her. They will destroy the economy. And if you put that on our truth table, that argument would come up as invalid. Why would it come up as invalid? It's because you need to add another implicit premise, a premise that almost everyone in our culture agrees with, that we shouldn't vote for people who would destroy the economy. So when we see an argument that has an obvious gap in it, sometimes the right thing to do is to fill in the gap and then analyze the argument with the added implicit premise. So we want to examine the best version of the argument. So we want to put the argument into logical format. We want to put premises first. there's no hard and fast rule on what order the premises have to be, but it's sort of smart or intuitive to put the premises in a way that they build on each other. You want to put the conclusion last, and then you want to ignore redundant claims, unnecessary adjectives, dramatic prose, polemical language, and so forth. One of the most offensive things one of my mentors did in grad school, first time I asked for help with a paper, he took my paper, he took his red pen, and he started crossing all sorts of things out. And I'm like, I worked hard on those. You know what he crossed out? He crossed out all of my adjectives. I like adjectives. But the point is, adjectives add no logical force to your arguments. They might add emotional force, which is why we like them so much. But for the sake of logical format, we don't need them. All right, now I think this should be reviewed because we talked about this when we talked about Aristotelian syllogisms. Any questions about these? How about any specific exercises, problems from the exercises you'd like to have me chat about? It's probably good for us to talk about a couple of these. Yes, sir.
Number 6.
Number 6. We are in 6.9. Number 6. That your views are logically consistent is a necessary condition for your views to be sensible. Your views are logically consistent, so your views are sensible. All right, so we start by looking for the conclusion. So is a conclusion indicator. So your views are sensible. Your views are logically consistent. Looks like premise 2. That your views are logically consistent is a necessary condition for your views to be sensible. All right, let's go back and look at the necessary. That's if not A, then not B. If your views are not logically consistent, then your views are not sensible. Remember, we said that necessary is one of the few words that triggers translating negations, where we see no negation words in the English. Then we attempt to test for validity. Remember, truth assignment test, assign truth to the premises, false to the conclusion. For premise 2 to be true, L must be true. For the conclusion to be false, S must be false. We then plug those values into premise 1. When the S is false, not S is true, the right side of the narrow statement is true, the statement will be true. So this argument is invalid when L is true but S is false. Good question. What else? What other ones might we talk about? Yes, sir. 7. If Ohio State wins but Nebraska doesn't, then the Ohio Buckeyes will be national champions. So it looks like the Ohio Buckeyes won't be national champions since Nebraska is clearly going to win. All right, so this is an annoying one where they stuck the conclusion in the middle. The so, it looks like the Ohio Buckeyes won't be national champions. Not O for Ohio is the conclusion. Nebraska is clearly going to win is a premise. N for Nebraska will be premise 2. If Ohio State wins, but is an and, but Nebraska doesn't, but not N, then the Ohio Buckeyes will be national champions. Huh. All right, see, that's sneaky. So what they did was they gave us 2 different phrases involving Ohio State that need different letters. We need one for Ohio being national champions, which I chose O, but we need a different one for Ohio State winning. So I can't choose O there as well. So there, I'm just going to choose S. All right, so that's Ohio being national champions. All right, then once we've got that, then I think that works. So let's try truth assignment test. All right, we need N to be true. We need O to be true. Since the right side of this arrow statement is true, no matter what goes on in there, this is going to be true. So the argument is invalid. It's invalid because the first premise is true, no matter what, and the conclusion is false. Does that make sense? Yeah, that one. Yeah, the trick was there was finding a way to distinguish between a different term for Ohio State winning, but Ohio State being national champion. So you needed two different terms for that. Yes. Yes. It's because we can have N true and O true, and that causes both premises to be true, but the conclusion to be false. Yep. All right, let me do one. I'm going to do one because I want you to see what it looks like when there is a missing premise. So let's look at number 3. Number 3 says, if they blitz but don't get to our quarterback, then our wide receiver will be open. So our wide receiver won't be open. Actually, maybe that's, never mind. Let me do number 1. Number 1 definitely has a missing premise. Knowledge can't be sensation. If it were, then we couldn't know something that we aren't presently sensing. Knowledge can't be sensation is the conclusion. If knowledge were sensation, if S, then we couldn't know something we aren't presently sensing. Then not K. All right, so now we have a problem. The problem is there's an obvious gap in this argument. All we have is a conditional here. We need to supply some implicit statement, and the implicit statement here is K. The implicit statement is that we can know something that we aren't presently sensing. For example, based on memory. And then when you do that, then this will pass the truth assignment test. That's going to be true. No, right. So the left side of the arrow is true, but the right side is false, meaning that we've tried to force an invalid set of values, but we can't keep premise 1 true, proving the argument is valid. All right, anything else from 6.9 before we move forward? Yes. Number 20. It's virtuous to try to do what's good. On the other hand, it's not virtuous to try to do what's socially approved. I conclude that, contrary to cultural relativism, good doesn't mean socially approved. I assume, of course, that if good meant socially approved, and it was virtuous to try to do what's good, then it would be virtuous to try to do what's socially approved. All right, let's find the conclusion first. They have a nice conclusion indicator for it. I conclude that good doesn't mean socially approved. And I'm going to translate that as not M. Good doesn't mean socially approved. All right, everything else is going to be premises. It's virtuous to try to do what's good. G. On the other hand, it's not virtuous to try to do what's socially approved. Not S. I conclude that good doesn't mean socially approved. I assume, of course, that if good meant socially approved, if M and it was virtuous to try to do what's good, G, then arrow, it would be virtuous to try to do what's socially approved, S. All right, so let's, anything else in there? No, that's right. All right, so let's try to do truth assignment on this. For premise 1 to be true, G is to be true. For premise 2 to be true, S must be false. For the conclusion to be false, M must be true. Then we look at premise 3. The and is true because both halves are true. The S is false. So we have true on the left side of the arrow, false on the right side. Makes the arrow false, which means premise 3 is false, and the argument is therefore valid. Was the challenge the translation? Yeah. I mean, that was a little weird, awkward the way they gave that to us. All right, let's push forward a little bit. I want to get some 6.10 introduced for today. There we go. All right. So where are we going with all this logic? Where we're going is here. We want to get to the point where I can give you a couple of premises and tell you to try to prove something based on those premises, and you can do a couple of inferences from the premises to reach that conclusion. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the tools, the rules of inference and simplification to show what sorts of claims can be inferred or are implied by different kinds of statements. So right now I'm going to give you 3 rules. We're going to call them S rules. And what the S rules are, they are 3 kinds of statements where you don't need any additional information simply based on any of these three kinds of statements, you can immediately do some inferences. And the three kinds of statements are going to be an and statement, a negated or statement, and a negated conditional statement. So first, the easiest, most obvious one, the and statement. If I claim that both A and B are true jointly, it also implies that A is true individually and B is true individually. All right, simple example. Let's say I invite you over and I say, hey, guess what? I have both peanut butter and jelly. That means I have peanut butter. And also, I have jelly. So the and statement means both individual halves are similarly true. So if they're jointly the case, they're also individually the case. And this also works with negative claims, as long as the negative claims are inside of the parenthesis. So if I say, I'm all out of peanut butter and I'm all out of jelly, that means I don't have any peanut butter, and also I don't even have any jelly. And you can mix. So you can have both positive statements, you can have both negative statements, and you can have one and one. I can say, I have peanut butter, but I don't have any jelly. And that means I have peanut butter, and I don't have any jelly. And both halves individually are true. So the and statement is simple and intuitive. Whatever happens on either half of the and, affirmative or negative, is the case. However, this and this are two different kinds of claims. And as soon as I put a negation outside the parenthesis, you can no longer use the and rule. Because the negation outside the parenthesis means we're no longer talking about an and. What we're talking about is a not both claim. And as soon as you get a negation outside the and statement, you need a different rule, which we will learn next time, not this time. All right, the next S rule is negated or, sometimes called nor, sometimes called neither nor, sometimes called not either. And what that means is if you have a negation outside the parentheses of an or statement, something with this pattern, then you can imply out, infer out the opposite of each half. So if I say neither P nor Q is true, then I can imply not P and I can imply not Q. So from the negation being outside the parenthesis, I can get the opposite of both halves of what's in the parenthesis. And that works with negations as well. Now this pattern under bullet point 2 is not a normal way to speak in English, but because it involves double negatives. But roughly it says something like this. It is not the case that not P is true, or nor not Q. So I neither don't have peanut butter, nor do I have jelly. Which, oddly, from a double negative, it actually gets you positives. There was a student in my 5th grade class that said to my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Smith, he said, "I ain't got no pencil." Well, ain't and no are two negations. And from two negations, what do you get? You get an affirmative, a positive. So again, from this pattern, if you have an or, a neither, a negated or statement with negatives next to the or, you get out positives. And you can do it with one of each. So if the statement were not P or Q, then I would get the opposite of each half. I would get affirmative P and I would get negated Q. So with a negated or, you get the opposite of each half. Now I want to warn you about this. You need to write next to this that this in big caps, this only works with or. Because I see the work on a lot of exercises and a lot of exams. And you know what students love to do? They love this rule. They love this rule so much they want to use it when they're not allowed to. They love that I think most of you get the idea of changing the value of each half. But it only works with or. It doesn't work with arrow. It doesn't work with and. It doesn't work with triple bar. It doesn't work with anything but or. So, works with or. And finally, third bullet point, an or statement by itself isn't enough to imply anything. You need the negation outside the or statement. So this is a neither nor, and that is what this rule is for. This third bullet point is just an or. And from just an or by itself, you can't imply anything. We'll learn a different rule on Wednesday that will help you do things with or. But you can't do things with or by itself. You need a second statement that is the opposite of one of the halves. All right, one more. Negated if then. Negated if then, again, with the negation outside the parenthesis, allows you to imply something. It allows you to infer the match of what's on the left side and the opposite of what's on the right side. And again, this is one where it's very important to distinguish between these two very similar looking statements. From if not P then Q, you can't imply anything from that on its own. But from negated if P then Q, from that you can get the match of the left side and the opposite of the right side. All right, let's do a few of these together to practice. The claim P and U. I want everyone to have an answer, either from your homework or jot down what you think can be done with this. From the claim P and U. The correct answer is that from the claim P and U, you can get P and also U. Because that and tells me both constituent parts of the claim have to be true. So I can get the exact match of whatever we find on either side of an and. How about from or? L or C? I want everyone to attempt it or look it up on their homework. What, if anything, can we get from L or C? And the correct answer is we can get nothing. Because you need a negation outside the parenthesis to do anything with L or C. Or you need to use a rule that I haven't taught you yet, which I will teach you on Wednesday. All right, how about this one? If not N, then S. What can I get from if not N, then S? And again, what's important about what we're doing here isn't just that you copy down the answers. What's important is recognizing when you struggled or when you got it wrong, and you want to underline that and remind yourself how to get it right next time. What was the rule that you forgot? All right, so for this one, the correct answer is nothing. You can't infer anything from if not N, then S. Why? Because you need that negation outside the parenthesis. That negation is inside the parenthesis, and I haven't given you a rule to do anything with that. How about, it is not the case of if F then N. What, if anything, can we get from this? We can get, so this one, unlike the previous one, this one follows the pattern of the rule because the negation is outside the parenthesis. So we can get the match of the left and the opposite of what is on the right. So from that, we can get F is true and not N. How are we doing? Good. Good. Any final questions? For next time, we're going to do the I rules, which are rules for negated and, for or, and for non-negated error. So by the end, we will have at least one rule you can use with each of the basic operators. Okay? Enjoy your spring day. Thank you very much. Remember, you've got a test in just over a week. So study hard, and you need to get these translation skills and these rule skills down cold. Thank you very much. Thank you for lending me your book.
For the
Mm-hmm.
for this one where this is like the get a ride and something else.
Mm-hmm.
I returned with this one,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that it's still like valid, but if it's not the same,
Yeah, you gotta get the translation right
that's
too.
exactly right.
Right. Now, luckily for stuff like that, since I usually just ask valid or invalid, you might get it sort of accidentally right,
Okay.
which probably works.
So I have a question about the last problem we talked
Sure.
about. Why would the negation also be for the M? Why is it only for the M?
Because it's an arrow statement and it's not, so for the or, it goes to both halves.
Okay.
For the arrow, it only goes to the second half.
Oh, okay.
And it's because the only time this is false is when the left side is true, but the right side is false.
Mhm.
So saying this is the case, not F then N, what that's saying is that F must be true and N must be false.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for paying attention. You're engaged. I can tell, I know who's engaged and who's not. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I was really happy with the work situation.
there's usually, I think, if they was assigned both at 10 and 11. So does that mean that it will be 12 and 13 next time, or do I just do both? So I did both 10 and 11 for today.
I mean, I might not, it means, obviously, we didn't move, I can't trust people to
Yeah.
very closely while it's going.
Right.
So, we're playing a little bit of catch up.
Okay.
So if you don't have it all done, it's probably okay, but it's probably good to start. Because
Yeah.
at some point, I'm gonna try to catch up.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Good, thank you. And thanks to you too for actually paying attention. Because you actually know what homework was due.